Imagine crafting your own wall art. Maybe it's a passion that fascinates you, or maybe it's the promise of an immersive creative experience like no other. A piece of iconic art you can build for yourself. Relax and reconnect with your creative side. We've created unique soundtracks curated around the world of art, animation, music, and movies. And in this soundtrack, we'll dive deep into the world of the king, Elvis Presley. First, we meet music expert and Elvis historian John Jackson.
It's completely, written off as, oh, he was this recluse and he, this Howard Hughes type person who was just locked up in his house, and couldn't be further from the truth when you actually hear the sessions and you get in there and hear the band having a great time and hear him directing everybody and laughing and trying to find the sound that he was looking for and really going for it singing-wise.
Emmy Award-winning costume designer Janie Bryant.
It was so much fun to get to know Priscilla a little bit more and to talk to her about Elvis, and she told me so many things about Elvis, and I'm sure I looked at her with like doe eyes in disbelief that she was even telling me these stories about Elvis.
Director of Graceland Archives in Memphis, Angie Marchese.
Elvis was kind of like a sponge that absorbed all of these sounds of the areas that he grew up in. And he was absorbing all of this as a kid. And then moving here to Memphis, which Memphis really is a melting pot for music and for pulp culture.
And then we'll also hear from Lego designer Kit Kosman, who created the Elvis images in Lego art that you might be working on right now.
And especially the guitar strings was a bit of a battle because the guitar strings on the Ultimate are larger than actually strings on the guitar would be. So it was a lot of playing around with the colors to make them seem smaller and not so obvious like they were becoming.
You can listen as you build at your own pace and get the inside story. Ready to dive in? I'm Andrea Collins. Welcome to Lego Art. Our first guest is John Jackson. He did the world's first bachelor's degree in rock and roll history, and then his thesis work specifically on Elvis. Then he went to work at Sony's Legacy Recordings, overseeing Presley's catalog. Welcome, John. How are you doing?
Thank you. I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Would you describe yourself as an Elvis historian?
Yeah, definitely. I would say less of an Elvis trivia person. There are plenty of wonderful folks who are way more into sort of the trivia and facts and stuff, and I'm more into sort of the cultural impact and sort of what he was doing or trying to do in various stages of his career. And I think that there's a lot of it that's misunderstood by the public. So I think that some of the work that we tried to do at Sony and then, continuing to do with other projects, including this podcast, is trying to help people understand what it was that he was doing in his life. His story gets shortened and shortened and shortened over the years. So what we were trying to do is going into different periods of his career and saying, well, no, he actually was trying to do this, and he was trying to record this kind of material, and he was trying to make this kind of a record. And, unfortunately, the way that the industry was at the time, through the 60s and 70s, and the way that his management was at the time and the record label was at the time, a lot of his material is widely misunderstood. So in terms of being a historian, that's the kind that I'm trying to be.
That's so interesting, John. I'd like to hear more about that in a bit, but let's first say hi to Emmy-winning costume designer for Mad Men and Deadwood. She's the author of The Fashion File that offers readers a peek into the dressing room of Mad Men. She's also been a speaker at Elvis Week at Graceland, talking about how Elvis Presley was and still is an inspiration on fashion, artists, and her own work. Janie Bryant, welcome, and thanks for being with us today.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to talk about Elvis because Elvis is one of my favorite subjects. So I can't wait for this. Thank you so much for having me.
And I am so excited to talk about Elvis fashion with you. This is so fun.
Yeah.
Now, first of all, what is your own relationship with Elvis?
I started listening to Elvis when I was a little girl. because my father loved Elvis so much. I mean, he loved Elvis so much that he had the sideburns, he had the gradient eyeglasses. Everybody told him he looked like Elvis. He was super stylish, and in so many ways, my father reminds me of Elvis, and my father loved Elvis, and he really got me started listening to Elvis music. We always had to watch the concerts together, on TV, and he sang Elvis all the time. So my dad was really the one who introduced me to Elvis and loving all his music.
Wow, the influence of dads with sideburns. I can't wait to hear more about what Elvis was wearing and how he inspired your work as a costume designer. But now let's go to Graceland, Memphis, Tennessee, and bring in Angie Marchese. She's the director of Graceland Archives in Memphis. Here, her role is to oversee the Graceland Archives, develop new exhibit concepts, and maintain the current exhibitions. Angie started working as a tour guide at Elvis Presley's home in Memphis all the way back in 1989. So it's been, trying to do the math here.
It's actually been 32 years.
Wow, that's a long time, Angie.
I try to tell people not to do the math when I tell them when I started. I'm like, don't do the math. But it's great. It's great to be here. It's, wonderful to be able to talk to you guys about Elvis, one of my favorite subjects.
Yeah. So, and did I describe your role correctly? Like, what's the day-to-day of your job?
My day-to-day is very unique. It goes from exhibit cleaning and maintaining the mansion to developing new exhibits to doing research in the collection, trying to figure out if stories are true, finding photos, helping licensees, running day-to-day operations, basically. So every day is a different day in my world.
Would you have ever imagined that when you started in 1989, you would still be at Graceland?
No, when I started in 1989, I literally was a tour guide, and I never thought in a million years that I was beginning a career. I really thought that it was going to be a fun summer job. I got to talk about Elvis to people from around the world, and then I would go on to college, and I really wanted to go into PR and move back to Florida. That was my goal. 32 years later, I'm still here. It's like my summer's never ended, basically.
So where's your office in the grand scheme of things when we think about the mansion?
And so my office is to the right of the mansion, directly across the street from the Lisa Marie airplane.
Wow, that's so neat.
So the nose of the airplane points to our office building where my office is located.
That's so great.
And I got a quick access to the property through Elvis's secret entrance behind our corporate offices.
Get out. And what's the secret entrance? What's it like?
It's cool. There's a back gate to the property that the building we're in used to be a church. And Elvis paid the church rent to access this back street that he paved in case the front gate was too crowded, that he could just go out the back part of the property, out the church, onto Elvis Presley Boulevard. And we still access it today.
Wow, that's so amazing. Let's jump over the Atlantic to Denmark and bring in Lego senior designer Kit Kosman. Welcome, Kit.
Thank you so much.
Now, are you an Elvis fan like the rest of us?
Actually, I am definitely an Elvis fan. When I grew up in Denmark. I am Danish. And mostly we were just listening to songs in the radio, and that was a lot of Danish pop music. And both my parents were very fond of Danish pop music. Mm-hmm. So the first time I actually listened to Elvis's voice through the radio, that was so different from what I've heard before. Also, like the whole thing about singing in English, and his sound was so different from what I've ever heard. So I remember that. And then when I got a bit older, I remember like seeing a picture of him and in his white suit with his rhinestones on. And to me, that was just like, whoa, like I knew nobody who was dressing like that. And it felt really good because I myself liked to dress up as a child and also like to dress up now as an adult, but definitely did it also then. And every day was a new day. I always dressed up in new ways. So kind of seeing this like role model in his white suit was just such a stamp for me for it being okay to go all in and dress up, even though it's just a normal day. So I really love that part of it as well. And a funny fact is that I later studied to become a fashion designer to kind of make a statement that it's okay to be different and look different. So I would say, like, especially the way he was dressing was an eye opener to me.
That level of self-expression through clothing.
Yeah.
It's just he owned that.
He did.
John, I'd like to hear a bit more about what you said in the introduction about Elvis being misunderstood. I'm sure there's many, but what's one that you would say is a common misunderstanding of Elvis?
I mean, the biggest one is that he was struggling in the 70s, and that he sort of, as soon as he put the white jumpsuits on and, was doing live shows, that the recorded material, the studio stuff started to suffer, and he was doing songs he didn't like to do, and he became this sort of recluse type of a person, and all of that is completely untrue. He was always trying to record fresh material. He was always trying to update his sound. He was always trying to sing better. He was always trying to find material that was meaningful to him. And the unfortunate situation was, at that time, it's completely written off as, oh, he was this recluse and he, this Howard Hughes type person who was just locked up in his house, and couldn't be further from the truth when you actually hear the sessions and you get in there and hear the band having a great time and hear him directing everybody and laughing and trying to find the sound that he was looking for and really going for it singing wise.
Wow, that's so interesting. I'd like to hear a bit more about Graceland, Angie. You have a big event every year at Graceland called Elvis Week. What can you tell us about it?
So Elvis Week is a week of celebrations and events that happens here in Memphis. It actually was kind of a grassroots thing that started when we first opened up for tours in 1982. And so we welcome fans from around the world here. And it surrounds the anniversary of Elvis's passing. But it's not a very somber time. There's a moment of reflection on the night of the 15th when we hold our annual candlelight vigil. But the rest of the week is dance parties and celebrations and conversations about Elvis in the movies or in the studio or shows from the archives and things like that. It's all about who Elvis is and who he still is today. And it's so much fun. It's kind of like a big family reunion where you have fans that gather every year. They're from different states, and their common thread is that they all love Elvis. And so it's always a lot of fun. You see a lot of familiar faces, but it's our opportunity to kind of celebrate his legacy.
That sounds fun. And you've gone to that party for 32 years now.
I've gone to the party. I've worked events. I've been a host of several events, and every year is always a lot of fun.
Ah, that's awesome. Janie, you've been a speaker there talking about Elvis Presley's style. What was it like for you to be at Elvis Week?
It was incredible. I was actually with Priscilla Presley, and because I was a part of the Elegant Style Weekend.
Cool.
And it was so much fun. It was so much fun to get to know Priscilla a little bit more and to talk to her about Elvis. And she told me so many things about Elvis. And I'm sure I looked at her with like doe eyes in disbelief that she was even telling me these stories about Elvis. It's like I love Elvis from afar, and she had this amazing relationship with him. And so it was so fun to just listen to her stories.
No kidding. That must have been surreal.
It was. I know. I really had to pinch myself. I don't get starstruck too often. I work with actors every single day, famous people every single day. But to hear Priscilla talk about Elvis was such a true gift. Yeah. But yeah, so I was with Priscilla at Graceland for that weekend, which was so much fun. It was great.
John, you've been part of Elvis Week at Graceland many times. What's it like for you as a speaker and an Elvis fan?
Oh, it's the best. The Graceland folks are just amazing. I mean, they're so welcoming. It's like a clubhouse, when you get down there, because it's just all people who have dedicated their lives to appreciating Elvis. And I mean the fans, and I mean the people that work there, and the people that worked with him during their lifetime, and the people that have studied him, the people that are working on different projects of him all the time. It's really a commonality that you don't find with other artists. There's not something that is, once a year a pilgrimage to go down and just interact with your fellow Elvis fans. The Graceland folks are all Elvis fans, and you can tell because they really care. They go the extra mile. All the exhibits, all the panels they put together, just spectacular. And it's something I actually look forward to very much every year.
No kidding. You're with your people.
Yes.
It sounds so fun. Now, Janie, you were a costume designer for Mad Men for 8 years, and that takes place starting in 1960 through 1970. So how did Elvis inspire your work on that?
Well, Elvis inspired my work on, many years of designing Mad Men. Elvis had and wore a lot of suits, especially, the 1960s suits. There's a photograph of Elvis, and he's wearing a gray sharkskin suit with a white shirt and a navy tie, like a skinny navy tie. And at the time when I was, designing Mad Men, I had designed a costume exactly the same color scheme for Don Draper that, he wore that costume a lot. It was one of my favorites. And it wasn't only until later that I'd been looking at photographs of Elvis, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's the same outfit that John Hamm wears in Mad Men. And it was just kind of a coincidence. But, I watched a lot of the Elvis movies during the time that I was designing Mad Men, and always inspired me for Don Draper because they had kind of like similar coloring too, like this dark hair. And like, I just loved, he really inspired me for like the color scheme of Don Draper, which was so masculine. And also when Harry Crane was kind of making that transition into the very groovy late years of the 1960s, Elvis wore a lot of scarves, and that inspired me for Harry Crane and his costume design when he was kind of shifting in from the early 60s to the later 60s. Yeah, so he, Elvis kind of, well, he always inspired me for Mad Men for sure.
Can we see Elvis's influence in Deadwood or other parts of your work?
Oh, yes. There's a film that I love called Charo that Elvis did, a Western. And, I really loved, it really inspired me for Deadwood because, it was like a very kind of like dark and dirty Western. And that was a film that really inspired me for Deadwood.
Oh, that's so neat. Keep an eye out for that.
Yeah, it's a good film. And Deadwood's great too.
Yeah. Now, let's go back to the beginning for a bit. Can you explain what made Elvis's music so different back then? What was the inspiration from his music? Where did it come from? Angie?
Elvis was kind of like a sponge that absorbed all of these sounds of the areas that he grew up in, starting in Tupelo, going to church every week, and then going and listening to the African-American blues singers down in Shake Rag. And he was just a sponge absorbing all of this material, all this authenticity, because that's what it was all about, was being authentic. And that's what that music really is about. And he was absorbing all of this as a kid. And then moving here to Memphis, which Memphis really is a melting pot for music and for pulp culture, because this is where everybody was migrating to at the time. And they were bringing with them their stories and their history and their culture, which included music, and being able to continue to absorb what he was seeing and what he was hearing, and actually being able to translate that into how it made him feel when he performed or when he heard the music. And that's what kind of happened at Sun Studios in 1954. It was all of these years of absorbing all of this material and then being able to express himself and express the way the music made him feel. And that spoke to people. And it still speaks to people today. The music that Elvis put out is timeless. It's so funny because you would think that these records were recorded, 60 plus years ago, but you put them on today and they're still so authentic. They're so real. And it's something that people can connect to.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. John, what do you think?
Elvis's music when he started out was not that different than other music. What was different was that he was a young white person who was doing the music he wanted to do and the music he grew up with and was so ingrained in his head in a way that actually white people could listen to because he was so handsome, so charismatic. It was sort of, sneaking the rhythm and blues and the rock and roll music that was already a thing into what at the time was a mainstream, very straight white culture. And that was really the thing. And he was the only one that could do it because he knew the music. He grew up with the music. He was from a different culture than the mainstream white culture. Mm-hmm. And it just came out when he sang. And that's why he was the one to actually spark that revolution of rock and roll music and get people to go, well, hang on. White people can have soul. White people can have emotions, let their feelings out through their music. And that was a big deal then.
Yeah, and when you think of the quick rise to fame he had and how he really changed music forever and made people like the cool Sinatra look so old-fashioned almost overnight.
Oh, absolutely. He was doing blues, straight blues, in a very up way. He was doing straight bluegrass music. Sinatra and the sort of crooners of the 30s and 40s were doing much more sort of professionally written music written to be sung by famous singers, whether it was Tin Pan Alley or Broadway music or, music made for movies, that sort of thing. It was very a professional songwriter writing for a professional singer to make a professional album to then sell to people. But, Elvis was doing, Arthur Big Boy Crudup songs and Lloyd Price songs and Big Joe Turner, Flip Flop and Fly and stuff like that. And it was just like he elevated that music and sort of broke it into the culture in a way that Sinatra never would have. He wasn't interested in it. Mm-hmm. And, Sinatra, and using Sinatra as an avatar, but, people like him, Bing Crosby or even Al Jolson or, people like that who had been very popular before that, were very much, they were a singer. That was what they did. They sang better than anybody else. And so they could stand there on the stage and sing into a microphone in a tuxedo, and that was their job. Mm-hmm. And so when Elvis came along and injected being a singer with, you have to look amazing, you have to move to get people's attention. So it was about, what did it look like? What was the presentation of it in a way that just hadn't happened before? And that's what really kicked the door open to, there's this whole other world of music out there that you don't know about. And so that's sort of how rock and roll started.
Kit, I'm looking at the 3 different designs of Elvis you made. They're amazing.
Thank you.
Can you tell us about the images you chose for these 3?
I can. Like the 3 different images kind of represent the different aspects of Elvis's character. The biggest image on the packaging that is kind of representing the sensitive Elvis looking at us. Then there's the smiling and charming Elvis we all know from the movies, at least if we see the new movies. And then there's the grown-up Elvis that is kind of singing with his characteristic large sideburns and his white jumpsuit on. So I wanted it to kind of like represent 3 different eras in his career.
And tell us a bit about how they ended up the way they did when you took the photo and then recreated it with the Lego pieces.
Oh, now it's getting a bit technical, so you might want to hang on out there. The way we do it when we make these images is that it goes through a lot of loops. The first loop is to get the face, the size of the faces right. And that takes a lot of trials and errors to get that right, because especially with portraits, and working with limited amount of pixels, you needed to be just the right size to catch all the features. And like Elvis has a lot of features. Like he has this very particular mouth, and he has a chin, and he had his hair. So all these features I needed to kind of capture in the images. That's the first capture the size of the face and make sure that you are able to kind of get all the features inside the face right. Then comes the next loop, like with getting eyes and nose and mouth correct. And when you work with pixels, that can be a bit hard, because what happens is that if you're too close to the image, it's actually hard to see what it is. So it takes a lot of walking to it, walking away from it, like asking a colleague, what do you see? Is this good enough? Should I change something? And that is part of the process. And what I normally do is that when I think that I'm pretty far with my image and have made it into Lego colors, which is a whole other story that I'll get back to, then I take that image that I'm kind of satisfied with, then I make a copy of it, start working on that and making it better, and take a copy of that one. So I'm taking a copy of the second one, making a third one, optimizing that, and that I continue doing until I have about 5 to 8 images lying next to each other. And then I start picking and choosing, like saying, okay, the eyes were the best on number 2 and the mouth were the best on number 5, and then I start combining them to make the best version of the portrait. Yeah, it is some work, and it's not done in a day, because actually you need the time actually to get away from it and get back to it to see if you've reached what you wanted to reach or not. And because of it being pixels and being a lot of gradients of colors to make nose and depth and chin and everything, then you really need to step away from it to actually determine whether the nose is all wrong or whether you got it. And it's like his mouth was not easy to do either. And also his kind of sad look, that the eyes and the mouth and the nose is just really hard to capture. And if you do it wrong, then it's not Elvis anymore.
Yeah, and it probably doesn't take much to make it not look like Elvis anymore.
You'd be surprised about the impact of just getting like a few pixels wrong. It's like, oh my God, what happened?
It's Elvis's weird-looking twin.
Yeah, exactly. It's a lookalike.
Yeah.
The colors of the image is a story of its own. Like when I originally got all the pictures, I tried out a lot of different color combinations, because what we do when we have to change something from a real image into a mosaic image is that we have to make it into less colors. And in this case, I think there is 16 colors in it. So what I needed to do was to kind of sit there and determine whether this shade of brown is dark brown or a bit lighter brown. And that is how you work with it until like all the pixels on the image is become into mosaic, the mosaic image in Lego colors. So it's very manually. And about the color palette, the colors actually ended up being quite true to the original image, because I tried a lot of different variations out to see whether there was something that could look better, some combinations of colors that could look better. But actually, the colors we chose ended up being very true to the original image, and that just gave it a nostalgic feel, with this very deep dark red in combination with the light blue as a contrast color. And the funny thing is that a lot of the images of Elvis back then has this warm tone of voice to it. That is, the colors are almost like they are too much, they're too bright compared to how they actually were. But that is also what I wanted to capture in these images. I wanted to keep that atmosphere in these images as well.
Well done. Yeah, you really get that feeling of those old photos.
Yeah, exactly. Like I wanted like this 50s feel to it.
Yeah. Okay, Kit, let's talk about the ultimate, the one where, it's the big image. He's standing there with the guitar. What can you tell us about the ultimate?
The ultimate is a model that you can build together if you buy 3 of the same boxes. And in this one, I had the opportunity to show more of his body because it's longer. And therefore, we chose to have a guitar on it, both because it's nice to have something else to build than just a jacket and a pair of pants. It's nice also to have the guitar there, but also to bring in the link to his music career and also his love for his his guitar I think he wore his guitar almost like an accessory, didn't he? Uh, but doing the ultimate as such is actually pretty much the same as doing the normal images. Of course, it's different to make a guitar instead of the faces, and especially the guitar strings was a bit of a battle because the guitar strings on the ultimate are larger than actually strings on a guitar would be. So it was a lot of playing around with the colors to make them seem smaller and not so obvious like they were becoming. So that was a bit of a challenge. And then there was his jacket, because he has this, I think it's a tweed jacket, on it a lot of different blues and grays. And I had to create this pattern inside the jacket without looking too like, it should be random, the pixels in it, so that it looked like tweed jacket. And also I should also be careful that I still kept the color on the jacket, and also where the arms on the jacket were, and also there was like, I think it's bending a bit where the guitar is, and there's a shade of the guitar over the lower part of his stomach. So to capture that randomness, that was also a bit of a challenge. But I think the good thing about it is that if you build it now, it's not going to be tedious, because you're still going to have to be on your toes to get that pattern right.
Mm-hmm. That doesn't sound like an easy job. That must have
that
must have taken some leaving and coming back to a few times.
Yeah, I would say like a portrait is of course harder, because portraits have to look like the person you are portraying.
Right.
But a guitar is not easy, and a hand is not easy either. Mm-hmm. But yeah.
It's these things you don't really think about when you're not the one actually designing it. And then hearing you say it, I'm like, yeah, how would you do a guitar strings in the little pieces to make it with limited colors? And, it's definitely a challenge.
Yeah.
So was it teamwork with these sets, with these models? Did you work on these alone? What was the process like?
Yes, it is teamwork when you're doing it. Like the way that we work in the Lego group is that each designer is allocated to a product. So you are working on this product yourself. But since we are such a big house and there's a lot of other designers, it's just a great opportunity to ask others as well, like how they see it, and if there's anything that they can see that you can do to actually make the image better. So we use each other a lot. So it wasn't only me who did it. Like I would say this is teamwork when we are doing it.
Now, Elvis was a trendsetter in so many ways. His music, his dancing, his just like coolness vibe overall. But it was very much about what he was wearing. So, Janie, can you help us understand how it was very different at the time, what he chose to wear?
Yeah, I mean, I really call Elvis the triple threat. He could dance, sing, and act. I should actually call him the quadruple threat, because he also had great style and he knew how to dress. And, so much of his inspiration, not only in music and in style, was from Black culture. Like in the 50s, he was a big trendsetter with like the baggy jackets and the baggy pants and wearing pink and black and wearing a lot of like mixed matched patterns. And, Elvis was really the one who was a huge trendsetter in that 50s style. And if you think about how he was a trendsetter in the 60s with the black leather suit in 1968, and then in the 70s, he really made the jumpsuits popular and fringe popular and beading popular and also like the gradient sunglasses and the sideburns. I mean, throughout all the 3 decades, he really was a trendsetter in every decade.
Now, he's been described as sort of like the sweet mama's boy from the South, but at the same time, he could make all these bold fashion choices, and he just didn't look very self-conscious about it. He was a trendsetter. Where do you think that courage came from?
I think that, he was born with that. And I think that he was a true performer, and he found that within himself. And he was a person who was very different, his whole life. And I think that's something that you are born with, and you know that about yourself, and you pull those things out of yourself to express who you are.
Yeah. What do you think, Angie?
Gladys was pretty feisty is what I hear. So he probably inherited a lot from his mom. She was very outspoken, and she was very self-confident in who she was as a person. And I think that Elvis got a lot of those traits from his parents, how you could still be very hospitable and have all the Southern hospitality that you want, but yet still have strong beliefs in who you are as a person and the core of who you are. And that came from his parents and from being raised in such a close-knit family.
Got it from his mama.
Yes, he did. And the funniest thing is that when we're recreating things for exhibits and I'm looking at photos and I'm like, wait a minute, is that a striped jacket with a paisley shirt? And you look at it and it's like, it looks so cool on him, but it probably would look ridiculous on anybody else.
Yeah.
But the one thing about him and fashion is that he never set out to be a trendsetter. He was very comfortable in what he wanted to wear. And it goes back to some of the photos we have of him in high school when he started turning the collar up when nobody else was. Or, he was mix matching colors, wearing a lot of pinks and blacks and things like that in the 50s when other guys were wearing jeans and t-shirts. He was really cautious about who he was and his sense of style, and he never strayed from that.
How do you think his youth, growing up in the southern states, the U.S., influenced his style?
Oh, God, I love that question because I love that Elvis got so much influence from Black culture and mixing like all the music styles of like gospel and country and soul and jazz. And, so much of that influence was from, Black culture in the United States. And especially, in the South. I mean, I'm Southern too. And, it's like it is in our culture. And Elvis just really totally embraced it and wanted to learn from the Black culture, from like music to dance to dressing, and just all of those gifts that we have from the Black culture in our country. It's such an amazing gift to all of us, and Elvis really was influenced by that.
Mm-hmm. Now let's talk about jumpsuits. Still around today. Definitely more women than men is become, I guess, the more mainstream. But it was something Elvis did well, very well, and made it look so masculine. So can you kind of talk about jumpsuits with us?
Yes. Well, I love a jumpsuit, and I love that Elvis loved jumpsuits and that he did make it, look so manly. And, part of why he loved jumpsuits was because it was, a clean line. He loved the looking neat and put together on stage. So, with a jumpsuit, you don't have a shirt that you're tucking in. He moved around and he danced so much that a jumpsuit really created like this clean, straight, solid line for him. And he could do his dancing, the karate, like all of the moves and perform and still look put together and neat and like seamless, I should say. And so that is really like where the jumpsuit came into play. It was all about looking great on stage.
Oh, absolutely. A lot of time, now all you see are pictures of him sort of up close in the jumpsuit, or, maybe the Aloha from Hawaii concert that's very sort of tight in on him in the jumpsuit with the big collars and the huge sideburns. And, it's something that people sort of have snickered at in the past, but they didn't understand what they were for. When Elvis was first going back out on tour and was doing all those concerts, he was playing these arenas in the middle of nowhere. There were no screens behind him with fun stuff on it the way you go to concerts now. There was no like camera shooting him close and then showing it on the big screen. So the jumpsuits were a way for him to distinguish himself on stage. If you were sitting at the back of the arena, in the 400 sections and had paid $2.50 for a ticket, which little person hundreds of feet in front of me is Elvis. And it's like, well, you could always tell which one because he was shiny and, you know, this sort of exaggerated version of himself, almost like actors wear stage makeup to give that across to people in the 50th row or whatever. And so that's what those were for. So you could sort of pick him out on the stage and watch him move around and know exactly what he was doing. They weren't really to be photographed so close up like that.
And he also knew that like white looked great on stage and that light blue looked great on stage and that he could really shine on stage, like wearing those colors, and why he wore, white jumpsuits so much. And then like all of the embellishments and the sparkle and the fringe, Elvis loved a lot of embellishments, a lot of decorations. And yes, you're right. I mean, he still made it look masculine. And you're also talking about an era, the 1970s, of, jumpsuit Elvis, which was a time in which men were pretty fancy in their dress and in their style. And I think that like we forget that, men of earlier decades were really about being a peacock more than understated. And, luckily Elvis really, was in an era where being fancy and being fabulous was like very masculine. And, I think that's how he really showed that on stage.
Yeah, fancy and fabulous.
Fancy and I know all the F's, fancy and fabulous, for sure. And also, Elvis had, it's crazy that he was self-conscious about anything because, he was such a beautiful person physically and spiritually and just in his music, but, he thought that his neck was too long and too skinny. So he had all of his costumes designed so his collars were really big and tall and to help disguise his neck. Huh. And which is why like he wore a lot of like neckerchiefs and scarves around his neck and big collars. And, that really came into fashion too, but it was all to kind of like disguise what he thought was a flaw in his physicality.
Wow. See, we all have a thing. We all have a thing we're trying to hide. Even the king.
Even the king. I know. Well, you know what? That makes him human, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
What was something else he was wearing that no one else was?
Well, Priscilla told me this really great story about Elvis and his big belts and how that trend really started, or how he started wearing the big belts. She was telling me that Priscilla was in Mexico and she had found this belt that she loved, that she brought back to Elvis. And it was this, if I remember the story correctly, it was like this leather kind of woven belt that was like a men's belt that she loved. And she gave it to Elvis and said, hey, this would look really good on stage. You should wear it. And so that's when he started wearing the big belts. And then it just started developing into belts being made specifically for his jumpsuits. But I love that, he brought like big belts into fashion.
They say fashion always comes back. Do you think that we'll see men wearing more big belts and bell bottoms and jumpsuits in the future?
That is so interesting because, as we were discussing before, it really seems like the era of men kind of like being fancy has kind of gone away, and also, Elvis definitely knew how to wear a suit and how to wear clothing. And I think that he took great pride in his appearance. I would love to see that come back for menswear for sure. I love menswear. And I think that fancy men are the best men. I love it. I love all those elements of great style and men knowing how to dress.
And accessorize.
Yes. Rings, cufflinks, gold chains. I love it all.
The bling.
The bling.
It'll be interesting to see if men kind of go back to those elements of dressing. I'm not sure about jumpsuits though. When they were fashionable, yes, in the 70s for men. I think jumpsuits remain to be fashionable for women, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just say jumpsuits and big belts will always be stylish for women.
Yes, because it just accentuates, like you said, it accentuates all the right spots and sort of covers up all the not so right spots.
It's true, and creates like a long line, and it's like a seamless look.
Yeah.
And you know, a jumpsuit can always make you look flawless. Maybe this podcast will inspire men to get back into jumpsuits.
Yeah, come on, guys. Exactly.
I know. Get with the program.
Yeah. Now, David Bowie was a huge fan of Elvis. Bob Dylan, he idolized Elvis as a teenager. Cliff Richard said that Elvis was the one that inspired him and gave him his career. And even John Lennon once said in an interview, without Elvis, there would be no Beatles. But also, we see his influence in current performing artists. Now, I'd like to name some names that maybe or maybe not have been inspired by Elvis, and you tell me what you think and in what way you can see the inspiration, okay?
Yes.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
So first one, Harry Styles and One Direction. John?
I mean, Harry Styles and One Direction is sort of a perfect analogy because those guys all came from the nothing and auditioned to be on this television show, right? They were all individually on before they were formed into a group. So just that idea of, I have this talent, I'm going to make something of myself, I'm going to figure out the best way to do that, is very Elvis. You know, when Elvis auditioned for Sam Phillips at Sun Records, he didn't need to go to Sun Records to make an album for his mom, which is what he told people that he was doing. He could have made an album for his mom for $0.25 at the drugstore in a little booth that they had there. But he went to Sun Records where it cost him $4 or $5 to cut a side because he knew he was auditioning. He knew that there was this opportunity for fame, whether it was local or, you know, however big it was going to get. But he knew that. So people that go on, you know, The Voice and X Factor and Britain's Got Talent and all these shows, that's what they're doing. They're following his lead of what's the most direct path to get to being a famous person. Mm-hmm. And then obviously their sort of antics and music videos and, you know, just sort of reveling in having fun and is directly from Elvis. You know, he sort of invented music videos in his in all of his movies. And then Harry specifically, as he's, you know, broken out as a solo star, is directly out of the Elvis playbook with his fashion and his hair and his, you know, he understands that you have to be the total package. You can't just be a good singer. You have to look the part, play the part, sing the part, you know, be that person that people need you to be in order to really like buy into what you're doing.
What do you think, Angie?
Harry Styles, definitely. He embodies who Elvis was with his sense of authenticity to who he is as a person, to his artwork, his sense of style. His career path, if you look at it, has taken a very similar one to Elvis, first with the music, now with the movies. But I think also the fact that he comes across as being such an authentic person that people connect to personally. It's kind of the same connection Elvis had with his fans.
Mm-hmm. And a bit of a risk taker in like the wardrobe department.
And not worrying about what people say or what people think. He's still being true to himself.
Yeah.
You know, One Direction actually had several references in their video. Is it called Kiss Me? I think it is, or Kiss You. Anyways, but they're in a jailhouse rock scene. They're in a Blue Hawaii scene. So it definitely was a nod to Elvis there.
Right.
So I think that, you know, again, all of those guys being true to who they are as artists and that that they have this connection with their fans that's beyond just the music. It's a very personal connection. Mm-hmm. And that's the same thing Elvis did. What
about Justin Timberlake? Also a boy from the South.
Well, Justin's from Memphis too. And you know, similarly, he was going to do whatever he needed to do to be a famous person. I mean, you look at Justin Timberlake and go, well, he was made to be a famous person, you know, and he started through Disney, which was a kind of a path to a career in the 90s. And, the same with Britney Spears and, Christina Aguilera and several other people who ended up being massive. But he was always a little bit above all the other guys anyway on the show. And then when they put NSYNC together, you could always tell that he was a little bit better than all the other ones. So when he went solo, he's always maintained that credibility, that influence from the Black community that he's always, he doesn't shy away from talking about or celebrating. So I think in that way, he's very similar to Elvis.
Yeah, it's true. He was the standout guy from NSYNC. That was my
for sure
heyday. Angie?
Justin Timberlake, he's my guy. he's another Memphis boy. And Justin, again, being from the South and being from Memphis, absorbed the music and the history here and was able to translate it into his own music and his own career, again, being totally authentic to who he is as a person and as he is to his music. And it goes back to being a good old Southern boy. Yes, ma'am. No, ma'am. Yes, sir. Never forgetting where you came from. And that kind of shines through with Justin Timberlake. He seems like he's the kind of guy that you can just walk up to and go, "Hey, Justin." And he's going to sit there and take pictures with you and sign autographs, similar to things that Elvis would have done. And that's the Southern hospitality that he grew up with. But yes, his career so much mimics Elvis as far as being influenced by the South and about growing up in Tennessee and in Memphis and being influenced by the sounds of the area.
Okay, next artist, Justin Bieber.
Justin Bieber, I think similarly, he had a talent. He knew that he was talented. His parents obviously knew that he was talented. And somebody like that's going to rise from obscurity just on the strength of their musical talent. That's straight out of Elvis's playbook, and Justin Bieber was from Canada, which is even a harder place to break out of and to become somebody that is a fashion icon, basically a model from time to time, and has had sustainable hit records all this time when people haven't been kind to him. From time to time, people he's had as detractors for sure. But to maintain that kind of fame status and quality music is definitely something out of Elvis's playbook.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think at a point in his career, he was trying to mimic Elvis's style again. There is something that he wore a Golden jacket to, and when you see it, it's like, oh, that's a nod to Elvis. I think that he's a little bit more, I don't know, sheltered, I guess, not as much out there as Elvis was. So I don't see a direct connection, kind of like I do with Harry Styles and One Direction, that they're just out there being themselves.
Yeah.
I think Justin grew up too quickly. I think that's the connection.
Yeah.
Justin had the shot to fame kind of like Elvis did. And, then he had to take a step back and realize what all this meant to him and how he was going to deal with it. And it's similar to something that Elvis had done.
What about Miley Cyrus?
Oh, Miley's she's wild. She goes for it all the time. I mean, obviously she's another one who was famous as a very young person and understood that things like television, things like movies, things like TV appearances, stuff like that can further your career in a way that some people just don't understand. And she understands the camera and how to speak and how to get her sort of Miley-ness across to people in a way that's actually really difficult. You're either born with that or you're not. People can't really learn that. And she was definitely born with it, the way that Elvis was.
Janie?
Well, I know that Miley Cyrus is truly inspired by Elvis and that she has worn her own Elvis-inspired outfit on stage. And I've seen that and I love it. It's amazing. Yeah.
Oh, Miley's a good old Tennessee girl. Miley, again, as being authentic to who she is and being able to adapt. Kind of like what Elvis did with his career. Elvis's music changed. There's the 50s Elvis, then you have the movies Elvis, then you have the 70s Elvis, and he was always able to adapt to what was going on around him.
Yeah.
Miley's the same way. She's been able to adapt her career and been able to adapt her music to what's going on around her. And as things change in her life, she's able to make that quick pivot to express herself through her music, similar to what Elvis did when he wanted to go gospel or when he wanted to do Christmas. And even if the studios weren't 100% behind it, he was. That's what he felt he needed to do. And that's kind of what Miley's doing now.
Yeah, you're right. Bruno Mars, the incredible Bruno Mars.
I mean, Bruno Mars, he was an Elvis tribute artist when he was 6 years old.
Get out. That's so funny.
If you see the movie called Honeymoon in Vegas with Sarah Jessica Parker, James Caan, Bruno Mars is in that film as a 6 or 7 year old Elvis tribute artist. Again, same thing. Like, it's just the undeniable talent of somebody like him. And he brings in dancing. He brings in singing. He's a true showman in the way that Elvis was,
yeah.
I think. And plus fashion and plus charisma and plus just collaborations. And he may be the most direct line to Elvis, that exists today, I think. And because he studied it, he knew exactly as a child through his father what to go for in your career. And like the pinnacle obviously is Elvis.
Bravo. Knocked that category out of the park. So why do you think he's still so relevant today?
First of all, he's an icon. Like, he's in a special league of his own, at least in my mind. Like, he's the personalization of the American dream. Like, he went for it and he lived his dream and became a very popular musician. I had the pleasure of visiting Graceland myself when I was about 25 years old. And Graceland was definitely on my bucket list. Like, it was just one of the things that I needed to see. And I remember coming to the house, and I wouldn't say that I was disappointed, but I was like surprised that the house wasn't bigger than it was. Like, to me, he was the king. Like, I had imagined a castle.
Yeah.
So yeah, so seeing this house, that was a surprise to me. And a good thing was that I also had a ticket to go inside to see the rooms in there, and that really blew my mind, because every room had its own feel and soul to it. Every room was decorated in different ways. Like, I had my old apartment home in Denmark when I was over there. And of course, the flat was small, so every room was kind of connected and had kind of the same look to it. So just seeing this kind of interior where you went all in for each room and it had a purpose, it had a look, that was like crazy for me. I was super inspired by it. And I would say my house today doesn't look like my apartment. I'm much more like Elvis now than I was then.
Got a jungle room?
I at least have a lot of plants.
Yeah. So still a lot of interest in Elvis, even though he's been gone for almost 45 years. Janie, why do you think that is?
I know, isn't that incredible? I think because, with his music, he still continues to touch people's lives and hearts. And I know it's such an interesting thing that really his songs continue on, even though he's gone. And for people that, started listening to him after he had passed, I think that the music still really connects with so many people because he had such his own personal style. I think when people see him throughout the decades, that his style is still inspirational today. Mm-hmm. But I think it's that combination of, like I said, the quadruple threat. I mean, that is still inspirational today because that is a rare thing. Mm-hmm. And most people don't have that, or they haven't tapped into all those talents. But Elvis was someone who really tapped into all of those talents. Mm-hmm. Anyway, it's still inspirational to me today.
Yeah.
He transcends generations. He actually has gone from being this pulp culture 50s, rock and roll legend to part of American pop culture. He's like the bedrock of what our pop culture is. And it's not even dated bedrock. It's kind of like you can hear an Elvis song in a commercial that they've, revamped because of the beat or something like that. Everyone is still fascinated with Elvis and that he actually lived the American dream, coming from nothing and changing the world in such a short period of time. And it's just a phenomenal story that people are fascinated with. And even today, it's not even about the gossip or anything like that. Elvis is kind of this aspirational kind of figure where people aspire to be like him. And not dressing like him and things like that, but figuratively like him.
Change makers.
Yeah, basically. And it's so funny because Elvis is everywhere in pop culture. Even if someone just goes, like you mentioned, Elvis has left the building. If someone else says, I left the building, automatically people think of Elvis has left the building. It's kind of, a no-brainer. Or, Elvis's motto was TCB. And so when you hear taking care of business, it's like, yep, that's Elvis's logo. There's just these very subtle things that are part of our pop culture day in and day out that you can't help but think about Elvis when you see him or hear him.
Thank you for listening to the story behind the Lego Art Elvis Presley set. We hope you enjoyed listening to our conversations with 4 incredible experts in each of their fields. Costume designer and fashion expert Janie Bryant, music expert and Elvis historian John Jackson, director of Graceland Archives and overall Elvis expert Angie Marchese, and of course our own Lego designer Kit Kosman. How's your piece of Lego art coming along? You ready to hang it on the wall or maybe break it apart and build one of the other versions? My name is Andrea Collins. Thanks to our guests and thank you for listening. This has been an original soundtrack from Lego Art.